There are dire warnings that New South Wales will be hit by increasingly extreme weather.
2015 was the hottest year since climate records began.
Figures show this July was the single hottest month in recorded history.
Australia sweltered through its hottest spring on record.
Climate change is now affecting every country on every continent.
It's the rate that's of great concern.
And what do you put that rate down to?
Oh, it's human activity.
We have everything we need. Some still doubt that we have the will to act. But I say the will to act is itself a renewable resource.
Hello and welcome to Climactic. My name is Mark and I'm publisher of the Climactic Collective, the Trans-Tasman podcast network, by and for the climate communities of Australia and New Zealand. This week, it's the release week for the physical sciences part of the 6th IPCC report. It's been a big week for a lot of people in the climate community. I'm sure you've all read headlines, probably articles. You might have even read a bit of the report yourself. We're all coming to terms with the confirmation that what we feared and we know, it's reality. The idea of a 1.5 degree hotter world by 2030. So it's a good time to talk about our feelings, how to cope with eco-anxiety, and how to learn to live with climate change. That's the title of a new book by Blanche Verlie, friend of the show and climate academic. And it's my privilege to bring you an episode of Talking in This Climate. Now, Talking is a very special kind of show. It's a logistical feat all by itself. And it's hard enough in this day and age to organize a Zoom call with 4 or 5 friends, much less convince them all to record a podcast. And then for that podcast to turn out this good is a minor miracle. I won't go ahead and reintroduce Talking in This Climate and describe what it is, because there's an intro that does that very well. But I will just say that this is the 10th episode of Talking in This Climate, and I am in awe of this team, and I'm so proud and happy for them to reach this milestone of double digits. I remember joking in the early days when they were just getting started that you could only call yourself a podcast when you'd reached double digits, and here they are. Through multiple lockdowns, through only remote recordings, they've persevered, and this show's really come into its own. So I just want to take a moment to say congratulations to Tim and Zoe, Amelia and Fani, Rosie and Ewan. And if I've missed anyone there, apologies, but you guys are like the Brady Bunch of a podcast. So congratulations on number 10. I couldn't be happier to celebrate this milestone with you. And now let me leave you with this excellent episode to help us all cope with our feelings this week. It's a great one to share with friends and family. And thank you to Zoe and Blanche, this week particularly, for this perspective.
Welcome to Talking in This Climate, a series where we discuss the different aspects of talking about climate change and environmental issues. We're a mix of environment students, graduates, and environmental communication professionals who are really interested in how we talk about climate in this climate. Each episode will dive into a different theme, looking at things like language, the media, communicating through frames and metaphors, Indigenous perspectives on environmental issues, communicating across disciplines, issues of trust and misinformation, emotion, and how we can ultimately strive to become more mindful listeners, communicators, and agents of change. We're so excited for this journey and so grateful that you're here traveling with us. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that I am calling in from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that this is stolen land. I'd like to acknowledge that storytelling and sharing knowledge is a traditional practice that's been happening on this land for 70,000 years, and that's what we're engaging in tonight. This is Zoe calling in today here. We're consistently changing things up here at Talking in This Climate, And for episode 10, I am absolutely delighted to be recording with Blanche Verlie tonight. And we're going to be talking about her research and her new book, Learning to Live with Climate Change, From Anxiety to Transformation. So firstly, from the whole team, Blanche would like to thank you for taking the time out to speak with us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And I'd also like to let everyone know that I actually met Blanche a few years ago. I was privileged to be taught by Blanche on multiple occasions, and she even mentored me through my capstone research on care and environmentalism. And now for those who haven't known Blanche for a few years, Blanche has a rich experience in environmentalism, activism, and education. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the Sydney Environment Institute and has degrees in science, social science, and education, and has published several journal articles exploring environmental education, emotional responses to climate change, and climate justice.
No, thank you. Thanks so much for the lovely introduction. And it's so great to be here with you, specifically you, Zoe, but also with the whole team, who have all been really helpful in helping me get where I am today, including in putting the book together, but specifically having been able to work and learn with you together over the years, Zoe. It's really awesome to have this opportunity to chat through those experiences together. So, yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity.
Anytime. So when I read your book in Melbourne's 4th lockdown, which I think was my 5th lockdown. And so for me, your book is just really precious to me because it was really hard going back into lockdown. But your weaving of words is so validating and tender and brings powerful insights into being climate anxious and being climate changed and negotiating that path of understanding the context in which we live. But before we jump into some juicy questions, I thought we'd have some quick little questions here, little rapid fire round to kick us off. So, Blanche, quick sticks, pronouns, what are yours?
Oh, well, I go by she, her.
She, her. And what country are you calling in from today?
Yeah, I am calling in from the very beautiful stolen and unceded country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Mm-hmm. Lecturing or tutoring?
Tutoring all the time. Lecturing is like shouldn't exist.
Favorite place to connect with the environment?
That is a great question, and it's a tricky one, but it's probably the little hobby farm that I grew up on just northeast of Bendigo on Dja Dja Wurrung country. I miss it a lot, and I guess it's just a real connection to place that I have having grown up there.
And finally, Melbourne or Sydney?
I've been talking about how great Melbourne is the whole time that I moved to Sydney, and I think it's been a barrier in making friends in Sydney. So at some point I have to start saying Sydney, but I miss Melbourne a lot.
That is a very fair answer. So if you could just give a little sentence or so on what the human nature binary is.
So the human nature binary, or sometimes called the dualism, refers to a pattern of thinking that's really predominant in Western philosophy and therefore the cultures that most of us live in today in places like Australia, that continuously produces the idea of separation and difference between humans and nature. So that's why we tend to think of nature as associated with wilderness where there's no people, and tend to think of people often as, of people as humans and humans as better than, more valuable than, and more intelligent than nature, which they're completely disconnected from and which they can have power over.
What is more than human?
So more than human is a phrase that is mainly used by researchers maybe one day it will be picked up by normal people. But that's trying to just refer to the fact that the world is composed of more than just humans. And it refers to, I guess, particular research approaches that focus on parts of the world that aren't just humans. But I guess in contrast to phrases like non-human, more than human sort of includes humans, but is also more than just humans.
And then this is a concept that I've actually referred to a fair bit on the podcast, and I'm now finally going to be able to get the words from you for this. Relational climate justice.
Climate justice, typically in its most basic form, is about thinking about how the people or the parties, because that might include non-humans, that have contributed the least to greenhouse gas emissions tend to be those that experience the worst impacts. And so that's the injustice, the difference between who contributes the most to the problem and who experiences the worst impacts. In trying to think about climate justice in a more relational way, I was trying to think about justice for relationships between beings rather than just justice for particular beings. I haven't really managed to make that something I'm very able to articulate clearly. But, for example, it's about trying to expand the kind of unit of analysis of justice from clearly defined individual people or individual groups to a more expansive sort of perhaps thinking about ecosystems, but other relationships like respiration and thinking about atmospheres and how we're all related and entangled with them.
We're at the finish line. Final question.
No, it's good. It's good. Keep them coming.
I'm like, I don't have no, I've only got one more definition. This is hard. Okay, climate changed.
So climate changed is my way of trying to, I guess, make sense of the fact that we are entangled with climate and part of climate. So when the climate changes, it makes sense that we change as well. And so it's a way of trying to attune to how our sense of self and identity and our interpersonal relationships are influenced by climate. So I guess when I think of myself as becoming climate changed, it's reflecting on the ways that climate change is this big global process around, greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuels and all these big global processes also materialize in my really everyday lived embodied experience as a person and how it's changing and influencing me or other people.
Yeah, it's when you look at the words, it's just the addition of a D. But reading about being climate changed in your book, I was like, oh my God, this is what it is. It's really powerful. I read it in lockdown. It meant a lot. Because you're sitting and you're thinking and you're climate change just gave so much power for how I decompressed and thought about things. So
yeah, well, it's really nice to hear how people might make sense of something that I've made up and maybe is not useful for people, but just is for me. So that's really great. But I feel like just in terms of you reading it in lockdown, I think it would be a lot easier for people to understand how their COVID changed. That our whole worlds have kind of collapsed and been reconfigured, and personalities. I think a lot of people are able to see how their sense of identity of themselves has changed because of COVID. A lot of us feel more introverted. I go to bed about 3 hours earlier. All these things that have changed in my world and life because of COVID. And I guess what I'm trying to make the case for is that climate change does a similar thing, but not at the same time as COVID does for everyone.
Yeah, and it's less linear.
Yeah, it can be up and down all over the place, really spectacular sort of changes and then really slow changes that are hard to notice as well.
I've got zoomed in my notes for the interview and I'm zoomed in on pre-TSD. So we're talking about that and I'm like, oh, I feel it.
It's a thing.
It's a real thing. And when learning about climate change and environmental issues, the emotional turbulence that we experience on that journey to being climate changed, or more or less, it can be really isolating and challenging, especially when terms like climate anxiety and PTSD and eco-anxiety and climate change now are only like now becoming part of common language and conception. So I get the question here is like, you've been researching and guiding people through their own environmental and emotional journeys as well as your own for a few years now. But I guess, like, how did you come into this space, and what do you seek to learn and share here?
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. Great question. I guess in a way, as a researcher, I was never looking originally to intentionally explore students' emotional experiences of learning about climate change. It's just that when I started doing that research, the course in the classroom was really emotional. So it seemed like it would be quite irresponsible to not pay attention to that. So that's how I guess it started. I suppose, though, that some people are more or less predisposed to be able to tune into that. So I think the fact that I was noticing that probably has something to say about the approach I'd taken to my teaching before I started the research project. Mm-hmm. And I guess being an environmental educator, often the narrative has been that we're trying to generate concern in people about the environment and the state of it. And so I suppose I'd had a couple of years of thinking that was sort of what my role was as a teacher, to be trying to get people, students in this case, to understand how bad everything was. And then in that particular course, where it happened to coincide with a research project, it, for whatever reason, and I think the reason is that the class was focused specifically on climate change for the whole semester, not on sustainability more broadly. It became very apparent to me that most, if not all, students were not only really concerned, they were really distressed. And so as a teacher, to be trying to just keep telling them how bad everything was not only not necessary, but really problematic. And so I suppose that's how it sort of started. In terms of what I'm wanting to share with people, I guess part of that shift from thinking that people don't get it and thinking that people need to be told how bad stuff is, I think it's important to recognise that for some people what looks like disengagement can actually be deep distress, and the distress being not knowing how to respond adequately, and therefore a kind of internal, not self-loathing, but disappointment and disempowerment. And so that can, like, someone who genuinely is not interested and not concerned can appear the same as someone who's really distressed but just doesn't know how to deal with it. So being better able to check out and make sense of who's feeling what and where different people are at is really crucial to making sure that for those people who are already really distressed, that we're supporting them rather than traumatizing them.
Definitely. And having gone through that course as well, like that focus on climate change for a semester straight, you could see how we ebbed in and out from that sort of like a capable level of concern into that distressed state, and how we would engage with each other throughout the semester as the students in the course. On reflecting now, I'm like, I can see that veering in and out of that distressed state when we engage and disengage.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that, and I'm never really sure how to approach this, but I think there's also, like, there's potential in that distress that is constructive as well. There are good reasons why we're distressed, and it's an appropriate and healthy response. The question is how do we manage and deal with that, and how do we respond to it? And I think leaning into the causes behind all of that distress and working out what they are and tracing them back to, I guess, what I think are the causes, which is extractive capitalism and, you know, the whole fossil fuel sort of colonial empire behind it, I think can help us tune into the causes of that distress and also help us ensure that our responses to that distress aren't so driven by a sense of urgency and unexamined anxiety that we end up perpetuating the problem. So I think there's a real risk that I think a lot of people that don't realise are really deeply distressed about climate change, perhaps for different reasons. But if they can't recognise that, a lot of the responses that we hear are really authoritarian or supremely anthropocentric, like a lot of the geoengineering stuff, a lot of the kind of, you know, rhetoric around needing to suspend democracy because we need emissions reductions at all costs and those kinds of things. The sort of quick fixes that are really not fixing anything at all, but seem to be something that people can latch onto as an immediate action. I think they're driven by a lot of anxiety that's not examined and really just like outsource the emotional distress and reflection that's required onto people who are less responsible and already experiencing the other burdens of climate change more intensely as well. So, yeah, I think it's really important that we're all reflecting on how we feel about climate change and the kind of politics behind that so that we can respond in more just ways.
Definitely. And it's that reflective process, it's difficult. Like, it's uncomfortable to sit and understand where and why you're feeling a particular way around this very grand experience of climate change. And it can be so overwhelming and consuming. And I guess, like, as an environmental educator and you're going to laugh when I say this, and I know, but as, like, how do you say this? I'm like, as a leader of thought, that's not the right way to say it, is it?
Sure, I'll take it.
Yes. In this space, as a leader of thought in this space, how do you negotiate, like, your own journey of that? Because that reflection, like, you can't just do it at point A and it's done. Like, it's a continuous thing. And so I guess,
yeah,
as an environment educator and a thought leader, how do you negotiate guiding, like, students and peers through that journey simultaneously as yourself, when particularly, like, in teaching, like, climate change responses and throughout environment studies, like, a lot of the fears and concerns that students would be bringing to you are the same as your own. Like, how do you negotiate that space? Or can you, like, is it possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're absolutely right that it's a journey and a process and not something that we tick off once and are like, oh, cool, I've just, you know, sorted out my climate anxiety. That's done now. And how to do it as a teacher or perhaps anyone who has a role of sort of supporting others. It is really difficult because, you know, there is a risk that you can, I guess, project your own worries onto others and perhaps perceive those feelings when they're not really there. I think that's less of a risk than pretending that people aren't distressed. I think the real issue is ignoring it or pretending that learning how to, I guess as I phrase it, like learning to live with climate change, assuming that that's a skill set that people will somehow magically already have or that will just kind of magically be taught through like some kind of absorption of something, I don't know, presuming that that's going to happen instead of trying to explicitly teach it. I think that's a real Like that's the real problem. And I guess they have seen people in positions where their experience is centered, whether they're, teaching or giving a public talk or whatever, who are really like hyper anxious in the moment. And I think that can be quite problematic as well if you're trying to kind of compel an anxious response in others. You do have to have like some kind of ability to be managing your own response and working out when you're there to serve others rather than to be getting into all your own shit. So there is some kind of duty of care and having to articulate those boundaries. But at the same time, I think pretending that you're immune from these feelings and that it's just, the people that you're supporting makes it seem like there's a way out, or that you've kind of ticked off the process, or somehow that you're better or stronger than them. So I think that's problematic as well. I guess the way that I try to approach it is sort of sharing my vulnerability and the feelings that I have without engaging them at that time, if that makes sense. So I might say, climate change, it makes me really distressed and it makes me anxious and it makes me really struggle to envisage what my life's going to be like in the future. I really struggle on how to make decisions around planning for the future, but try not to be the one who's having a panic attack in class as best as I can, but also acknowledging that sometimes I'm really shaken up too.
You did and you do an amazing job of that and bringing that vulnerability into how we talk about these issues that can feel so separate and can feel so far away, but simultaneously right there with us. I feel that bringing that vulnerability in provides the opportunity for us to actually do that active reflection and become more comfortable with talking about how difficult it is to not only understand that this is where we're at, but this is, like, as you said, the context in which we need to make decisions and live our lives. Like, learning from you has given me great sort of stead, trying to come to terms with the world, our existence. It's important that we, accept our vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think, you're right that the words are hard to find because I think we don't really have the vocabulary we need to talk about this, because the language we have from, disciplines that are useful, like psychology, is not really quite translatable to the sort of scale of the challenges that we're facing. And, I'm not a psychologist and I haven't ever been to therapy much. So I don't want to diss that discipline. I think they do a lot of fabulous work and I've learned a lot from psychologists in this space. But I think there is, and this is a really big generalization, but there is a bit of, I think, a tendency in the sort of therapeutic practices that with enough therapy over time, we can manage most problems. Generally, I know there'll be, I guess, particular cases where that's not true. But climate change is absolutely one where it's not only that we can't tick it off once and be like, that's done. Like, part of the reason for that is that the problem is continuing to get worse. And so it's not something where time will heal all wounds kind of thing. We're going to have to keep improving our capacities and increasing our ability to engage with the challenges. And, I think there'll be limits to that as well. There's only so much that we can talk and reflect about our feelings about it when, there's going to be, for all of us all around the world in different places and different times and in different ways, things that we're not able to face up to or live with or, adapt to or whatever. So, we can do our best and we can do better. But, the sad truth is that we're not going to just be able to talk about our feelings and get our way out of the, existential crisis, really.
Definitely. And that tension of wanting the perfect solution, like wanting that silver bullet now to fix everything, has been something that I've been working on the past few years, and acknowledging that we are cultivating these stepping stones to addressing the issues and the challenges that we face, and particularly in climate, with climate, and being okay with the learning process, and that we're not going to wake up like tomorrow and be like, oh, we solved it, all done, happy days, hunky dory. Like it's this big process. And I think that that's what makes sitting in the uncomfortability so uncomfortable, because it's not a yoga pose that you're holding, or lifting weights for, doing whatever, how long your set is. You've got to sit with it for your lifetime and for the future generations of all of the species on the planet. And it's so tricky to sit with that. But your book did it so well. Like, how do you sit with these uncomfortabilities, or like how do you find a way to sit in that space and thinking about past, present, and future simultaneously with that uncomfortability? Like,
yeah, look, it's really hard. And I think, the honest truth is, like, sometimes I'm just checking out of it. Like, it, for everyone, I guess it comes in spurts and then filters out. Like, during the Black Summer fires, which, went for heaps longer than a summer, I was beside myself. I couldn't think about anything other than those bushfires for that, whole period. And I remember having nightmares about like fleeing from fires, and then I would wake up and be like, fuck, I just want to go back to sleep because that was better. Like, it's actually happened. It's not just a dream. But now, having been kind of working from home in COVID, in a time where in Australia, in my experience where I've been, there haven't been any local sort of climatic crises affecting me that much lately. And also having a life where I'm not really engaged with other people very much anymore, partly because I don't have a teaching job, but I also moved cities, so I'm not really engaged with the community here. Because of COVID, I didn't make those connections. So I'm not having those conversations with other people where they're like, oh, yeah, and did you hear that? And, oh, and I'm really distressed about this. So these days I actually feel a lot calmer about it, but I know that that's just a coping mechanism, and that I'm tuning out of it, and I'm just trying to get through, this round of COVID lockdown and not kind of panic about the next big thing. But yeah, in terms of the discomfort, I think part of what makes it so uncomfortable is the combination of like guilt and like the complicity and the vulnerability to me. Like for those of us who are, privileged enough to live in places that are really, the center of the problem. And, we have a really nice life because, I've got the heater on and blah, blah, whatever. So feeling guilty about that, which is appropriate, maybe not productive, but I think also like there is a role, like people are really critical of guilt, but I think there's a role in it, which it helps us articulate who's responsible. And I think dwelling with the guilt and the sense of complicity for harming others, both around the world and in the future, but also creating conditions that are harming ourselves, I think that makes it really uncomfortable. And because it's not an issue of individual choice, it's structural conditions in the form of economic structures and also cultural patterns around our sense of entitlement to particular ways of being that makes it not something we can approach or fix individually. And so I guess, for me, that brings it back to why we need to talk this through together, because our feelings are similar because they're culturally and economically structured. So although we experience them individually, they're created through similar conditions, and that's why they are often quite similar. So if we want to really tackle those conditions that are creating the feelings, then we need to be exploring it together. And I guess that's how I try to approach that discomfort is not to dwell in the individual guilt so much, but to try to, approach it with friends and community, and to try to come up with some kinds of collective responses.
With the COVID of it all and harnessing these shared experiences of emotion, have you seen, or do you think that collective responses have changed, or how people sit with their emotions or share their emotions around climate has changed? Or
yeah, that's a really good question. I want to say yes, but I don't think I have. Not because of COVID directly. When COVID was first a thing, I think there was a lot of climate people who were like, oh, maybe people having to work at home, being locked down, slowing down the pace of life will give everyone a chance to reflect on what's important and maybe, think about climate change. And maybe we'll have a, just green recovery. A year or so later than that, I think that might be true for some people, but it's certainly not something that's happened systematically or at an institutional level. But at the same time, I think the awareness around the emotion that climate change generates is definitely increasing. There's a lot of information and a lot of discussion about it out there now, and I think that's great. And potentially there is a sense in which people have, through COVID, having experienced, I guess, a shared trauma. All our experiences of COVID are different to each other, but the sort of cause of those different experiences is the same. And for most of us, it's been mainly a painful experience. I know there's been some benefits for some people, but I think a lot of us have learned to talk about our feelings more, having to, connect with people over the internet in ways that are mainly talking based rather than playing sport with our friends, or, doing an activity where we don't actually have to actually engage with who we are as people and our deep thoughts about the world.
Yes.
So I think that potentially those coming together, the increasing discussion about climate anxiety, and hopefully people having been forced generally to live a more internal focused life, maybe that will come together in more discussion about climate emotions.
Yeah, I do remember, because that was when COVID was kicking off, was the beginning of my thesis, and there was so much around comparing the two and utilizing it as this opportunity and this amazing analogy, and that's fallen off the bandwagon with the green just regeneration, but no, none of that, not yet.
Yeah, there was a lot of that discussion, and I guess, there's been a lot of, having written a book called Learning to Live with Climate Change, and then all those discussions around how we just need to, live with the virus, which just means, let people die.
Yeah.
Presuming they're not me, has really made me question that choice of title for the book. But also be like, no, you're using that phrase wrong. Learning to live with something is not about giving in and giving it free rein. And it's not about abandoning other people. It's about respect for the world that is beyond your control, but stepping up to to find, you know, ethical and enjoyable ways to live in that world that isn't controllable, and yet you don't just let walk all over you. So, yeah, I guess that's something that I've been thinking about but never managed to really, write or articulate. But it's, you know, popped up in Sydney again recently. So
you've just articulated it beautifully. So
yeah, I need to write to whoever that health minister was. I can't remember which one.
It's not about leaving people behind, and it's about understanding where we're at, and not. I love the not giving in. It's like, yes, motivational speech.
Yeah. Thanks, Zoe. I got this like tank top at a clothes swap a little while ago, and on the front it says "Flaming Future," and on the back it says "Be yourself and leave no one behind." And I feel like it just fully encapsulates everything. I think like the future is going to be on fire, but also like stop like faking it and, you know, look after people.
Yes. I love that.
We need more T-shirts like
we need more people to live by the motto on the T-shirt, and then we can get T-shirts. I did want to circle back to like a few whiles ago to so you were talking about how now not being like not teaching and not being around everyone who's also talking about climate change and what's distressing them has provided sort of like some more space and respite. And because I know I've had the same experience now, like not studying it in day out and being in, you know, like only things that are centered around climate change. And I do feel that it's given me, the space has given me more clarity to see, I guess, where I fit in things and to take less of it on and to be more particular with how I engage that's akin to my to my skill set. And so like for me that's like focusing on disability inclusion. And I'm wondering like for you what that space has provided for you or given way for.
No, I think that's a really interesting reflection, Zoe, and I think it's an important one that, you know, I think there's a lot of, I guess, constructive like cultural and personal work that can be done through being in that kind of heightened state of panic, but that's unbearable long term. Like we just cannot live like that, and we won't. Like even as disasters compound and we might have a whole lot of background stress on, like people find ways to keep going and to not make disasters, you know, every moment of their waking thought, because we just can't do that in a way that doesn't destroy ourselves. So I think it is really important that, particularly if we're not in that position where we're personally living in disaster zones, if we're more, you know, at the moment having the experience of like seeing that on the news and being concerned about that, but actually having space in our immediate lives to kind of think about that, reflect on it, but also to not take on the entirety of the problem in a way that becomes so disabling that we can't do anything. I think that's important. And so, yeah, exactly, I guess one thing I've always wanted to be able to do with students is to help them find like their unique way of contributing that is both like meaningful and rewarding for them, that they're, you know, uniquely placed to be good at and to make a contribution through that, and, you know, to focus on doing that and doing that well, rather than, you know, trying to solve all the problems all at once, because none of us can do that.
Definitely.
And yeah, sometimes that means taking a break or regulating how much we engage with certain groups of people or certain forms of information. So, a lot of people who are really engaged with climate will be, like their social media feeds will just have always been doom scrolling. Like that's my case. That's only a recent term, but I've been doing that for like a decade. So I just don't use social media anymore, really. And I lose a bit through that as well. But whenever I log on and it's just trauma after trauma, it's just not really very useful for me. And so, I guess I feel like in terms of where I'm at the moment, I've had the good fortune of having had the task of writing a book during a year in which everyone was working from home, and a really individual task was really quite great to have during that time. It would have been awful if I'd written the book the year before, being stuck at home all by myself, and then COVID hit. So I feel really grateful for that overlap in timing. And, I guess now I'm hoping that I can find some ways to do some things more with community, as I've had a bit of that rest and respite now, and I feel kind of ready to go again. But I do think that, checking out of that intensity for a bit has been really good for me. And, that it's important, I guess, for people to realise when, you need to take a break or take a rest or switch out so that you can play the long game. Like climate change is really urgent, but it's not going anywhere and it's not going to be fixed quickly. So, it's definitely the marathon, not the sprint. And so, working out how to sustain ourselves over the long term is really important. And if that means that you have to take a break at some point, like that's so valid.
I want everyone to take note of the timestamp of when Blanche just told you it's okay to take a break. There is your permission. It's so important though. And I guess throughout this whole conversation, I think something that's really resonated for me is that none of this is static, and our experiences and climate and everything is this on this like constant momentum. The sentiment that in which you get or understand things it changes so frequently. So having those times out or those check-ins to understand how you can be like of constructive benefit is really useful. And I loved that sentiment you said before, like how you really want to help people find how they can be like productive in this space, and where they can use their skills to be moving towards a more equitable future. But even that, like everything, it does change and it is iterative. And I think it's just so important that it's not static, it's continuous.
You're right that it is important to recognize, but it's also the fact that everything keeps moving means you can't rest on your laurels either, right? Like the context, every year on climate change is different, and that's something that Lauren Rickards and I used to talk about in terms of teaching that course on climate change was, our resentment at like maths professors who surely rolled out the same lectures every year on Pythagoras or whatever. I'm sure there's also advances in mathematics too, but from year to year, like there's a new international agreement, there's a new IPCC report, there's all these new disasters that have happened that, illuminate new points, like the carbon emissions have increased, like every year it was new. And so the context that we were teaching in, both ecologically, politically, but also in terms of the emotional context that we're teaching, was always changing. And so that's one thing that made that really hard. And it does mean that, wherever people are at in terms of their engagement with climate change, it's always on the move. And so it's hard to sort of feel like you've really ever met the requirements for being good at it. But I think one of the reasons I like working on climate change or engaging with it is that, you're always learning, and that is kind of a rewarding process in itself. Like, it's always interesting if you can detach from the apocalyptic side of things. Intellectually, it's a really interesting phenomenon, right? Like, it forces you to think so differently about the world in terms of, you know, like the complexity of the planetary system, the complexities of human psychology, how all of this fits together. Like, I'm always learning stuff about climate change, and that is fun, even if it is also always distressing.
I love how candid that was. Like, it's fun. Well, you know, it's also distressing. But it is. And the realms of possibility, like climate change has completely thrown what we thought was possible out the window, out of gravity.
So funny how much we're laughing about this.
I know, it's kind of terrifying. It's a coping mechanism. But I think that's something as well.
I'm always hysterical.
Oh, I know. So I'm like, you know me. It's terrible. I'm always giggling. But I do think it is a coping mechanism. What else are you going to do when you talk about it? And I find it, at least, like, it is grounding to be able to laugh about it, because it brings you back from the spiral. And spiraling isn't that's not helpful if you're wanting to be productive or to care for yourself either. And so that brings back to that, the first things that you were talking about, like how that disengagement, or like how people cope with their climate anxiety. It can look really weird how we all muddle our way through this.
Yeah, totally. I feel like I'm often hysterical, and people expect me to be talking about something in a really formal, like, grave voice, and I just like feel like the only way I can speak is in this, like, supremely high-pitched, like, you know, maniacal laugh, because it's too intense.
But I mean, I've been in lectures and presentations and classrooms with you, and it makes it personable. Like, it works. If it was given in a grave tone, it's like, oh no. Like, if I'm thinking of, here's a common grave, loud, booming voice. If Dumbledore was giving you this information, it would be really hard and intimidating. And the facts and the context is intimidating enough. And so the relatability and the messages being delivered in a grounding fashion is, for me, that really works, at least, and is really important for how I absorb information, like in the educational setting particularly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to I have this dream of, like, becoming a stand-up comedian, except that I'm not at all funny and it's terrifying. But I think there's so much potential for, like, I don't know, at least maybe not humor directly, but like the skills that stand-up comedians have to, like, engage people, and, you know, the comic relief after the tension is built, to, like, help people engage and, like, breathe and get through it. I think there's so much potential in that. So anyway, that's
a perfect
another
segue.
skill for another day.
It's a craft. You'll hone it. I'm excited for Blanche's stand-up tour when we're able to do, like, in-person tours.
It'd be so dark.
It'd be really good. People would love it, though. I have been to comedy that's, like, because there was one when it was called the Anthropocene. It was it was all right, but this is already happening. There's already comedy about these issues. We can find it. We can go on tour.
Yeah,
that's
we should
support them.
Do. Yeah.
As you know, and as the listeners hopefully know, this podcast series is focused on, like, unpacking the impacts and strategies of how we talk about climate change. And I was wondering if, you know, you've talked about it for a while now, many years. You've written books. You've studied it many times, presented it so much. Any takeaways? How have you found effective ways to talk about climate? and in different settings as well, because there is no one way.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I think, some of the golden rules of communications is know your audience and speak to them. A lot of the climate communication stuff emphasizes that, having the right messenger that people identify with is important, like we've spoken about, being relatable. And then, framing it to align with people's values and that kind of thing. I guess as someone who's coming from it with the practical profession of being a teacher and the kind of community engagement I've done, which has also been around being a facilitator. For me, climate communications is just as much about listening and asking questions as it is about framing a message. And so that makes it, I guess, quite different to the kinds of communications that's about messaging. But I do wonder how much there is scope for, I guess, programs or institutions where mainly they're sending out a one-way message to audiences. What capacity is there to stop kind of trying to force it to be interpreted a certain way and to actually ask people questions and get them to reflect on it for themselves? I think that the climate communications literature is so dominated around how we need to kind of manipulate the message to push people to respond in a certain way. But when you think about the kinds of research that those sorts of studies are based on, it's usually around you get two groups of people, you give one of them a kind of doomsday message and the other a kind of hopeful message, and then ask them, how likely are you to ride your bike instead of driving and that kind of thing. But I guess as a teacher who works with people over time and having the ability to look at how, we don't live our lives as though we've just been shown a climate message and one only. We live our lives with all of those messages bombarding ourselves. And if we don't take the time to process them and make sense of them, then none of them are really landing anyway. So I think my takeaway is the more that we can make time and space and community for people to actually explore for themselves rather than being told what to think or manipulated how to feel, I think that's really crucial, because even if your message is great and if that was what influenced people, then they're just vulnerable to the next person with more money that's probably got vested interest in fossil fuels to listen to their message, So we need to be giving people the skills to critically engage with their own experience and make sense of it and respond to it. So, yeah, I guess my takeaways are ask questions and listen more than you talk.
That is something I need to be reminded of every day.
I think we all do, right? When you're really passionate about something, you just want people to know.
Yeah.
But, I think it's far more effective if we can ask people, hey, what do you think? How do you feel? And then make the connections with how they're experiencing it to the similarities we have, rather than being hey, do you know how anxious I am about climate change? I'm so stressed out. Let me tell you how stressful it is. Aren't you stressed? It's not a basis for a useful conversation.
No. And having a conversation and the communication being reciprocal, it also allows for the development of knowledge and strategies as well, because if you are just receiving that single message, where's the growth in this changing setting?
Yeah,
Remember,
and that's the
momentum.
Same. Exactly. So spot on, Zoe. Even for the people making the messages, right? To think that we know the answer of how people should feel presumes that we've already got climate change figured out ourselves, and we don't. So, some people have more knowledge than others, but everyone has valid knowledge and a really important role to play, and none of us have it all figured out. So I think we all need to be trying to learn from each other.
Definitely. I think that is a wonderful sentiment to to close out this conversation on. It's been bloody lovely. We need to do this again. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to help guide us and our listeners to their worlds with climate change. We appreciate your time, care, and vulnerability in sharing your magic words in this mayhem.
Oh, I just want to say thanks again, Zoe. It's been so fabulous to have the opportunity to chat with you about this, and it feels like a really unique opportunity. And you've asked really fabulous questions. And I really appreciate, being able to chat through someone who's also taught me so much over the years. Like a lot of what I've learned about all of this stuff comes from your really fabulous work at RMIT, both implementing and also researching students' experiences as well. So, yeah, thanks to you and all the work you've done.
To get Blanche's book, Learning to Live with Climate Change, From Anxiety to Transformation, go to www.learningtolivewithclimatechange.org, and there's a link to the book there. Well, thank you, Zoe. Thank you. This has been amazing.
This podcast has been created and produced by Tim, Emily, Farney, Ewan, Zoe and Rosie, with support from the Climactic Collective. This podcast has been made for educational purposes only, and any advice and information presented is general in nature and does not consider your specific circumstances. The views, thoughts and opinions expressed by individuals do not reflect the views of the Climactic Collective. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating as it helps others find us. If you're looking for more podcasts on similar topics, make sure to visit the Climactic Collective website. Thanks for listening.
The Climactic Collective.